Hello and welcome back to the Apprentice 1-to-1 podcast. It's me, Mark, and today I'm with you to try and explain a little bit in my own words about intermediate and two-way light switching. Before I start, there is loads and loads of content out there across YouTube explaining how this works, and I'm going to reference some of it later on in this video, primarily from Gary and Joe, GSH and Efixx, because I don't want to repeat much of what they have already done. But I get a lot of questions about this on Instagram and in the Apprentice 1-to-1 Discord. It is a part of your training. Some people have a real difficulty in understanding how this actually works because it can be a bit of a mind mash to start with. And along with the other videos I've done around AM2 and Guidance Note 3, the wiring regs and the on-site guide, where the idea is I chat about it and it drops into your ears while you're at work. It might be helpful on a subconscious level just to run through this as well. And I realise we don't all have time to go and sit and watch YouTube when we're busy in our day-to-day life. So I thought this would be an option for someone maybe to top up on some of the learning you've had in college and some of the stuff you might have seen on YouTube. I have made a little diagram on my whiteboard, and as I mentioned on the last episode, I am going to start dropping these out on the UK Electricians Guidance channel, I think I've called it. And that is really where I just drop content that people might find useful in their training, or if anyone else has something, hints and tips, whatever else to share, and they don't have their own YouTube channel or ability to edit videos, I can do that for them and drop it on there as well. Just a bit of a resource for people to make use of. It may end up with just me on there might be other people, who knows, but I'm certainly going to do a bit more video demonstration on the podcasts, just in case somebody who's listening thinks, oh, I didn't quite understand what he meant. I'll go and have a look and see if it makes any more sense. And I've drawn out the two different ways you can do two-way light switching, and typically you'll use one in an industrial environment and perhaps one in the domestic, and that's just due to the wiring methods that are used in those places and the containment systems for those wiring systems. And you'll see on the top drawing, if you are watching, I've gone for the method that you typically find in an industrial setting, and essentially with that you have a neutral that would be taken from your distribution board or your consumer unit straight over to a light fitting. So if you imagine a pendant on a ceiling, that's going to get wired straight into the neutral bar within the ceiling rows, and then from the consumer unit or distribution board, a line, so a permanent line, is taken into the common on your first light switch. So this is two separate light switches to operate the same light. Then you essentially join your L1 to L1 and L2 to L2 between those two light switches. So really simple, you're just joining dots essentially. And then the common on the other light switch is taken via a link cable up to the ceiling light, so the pendant, and dropped into the switch live termination. So you've basically got line in the common of one of the light switches and the switch line out of the other common. And then if you operate either of those light switches, then the pendant light fitting will operate, and you can switch it from one and then the other, and it will always either turn on or off based on its current state. Now the other way of doing it, and you typically find this in a domestic premises because we have, you've got your over-sheave flat twin and earth cable and your 3-core and earth cable, and it's a really simple method to get your two-way light switches working and then drop in intermediate switches as well. It's similar but different in the way that it's wired. So essentially, again, you would have your two light switches, and on one you would wire into your common and link across to the other common, and on the other you would wire into your L1 and link across to your other L1 and L2 to L2. So you essentially just join all of the dots. Common is connected to common, L1 to L1, L2 to L2. So that's your 3-core cable with the CPC in. Now we've removed all the CPCs from these diagrams just to make it a little bit easier to follow. But that's basically what you're doing. That 3-core cable links between one light switch and the other, and you'd use your brown in your common, your black in your L1, your grey in your L2 at both light switches. And on the other, it's on the other, I'm saying the other, it's on either of those light switches. You can take a cable from there up to your ceiling light fitting, so your ceiling rows, and basically you would bring down a common feed, so a permanent line, out of the loop in that ceiling light fitting, and also a switch live back to turn the light on. And usually that's through a twin and earth cable, so you would connect your brown into the common of the ceiling rows, and then the blue, which would obviously be oversleeve with brown, into the switch live of that ceiling rows. And then at one of those light switches you basically put those two wires into L1 and L2 separately. So in my example, I've put the permanent feed, the line, so the brown cable, into L2, and my blue over-sleeved as brown into the L1. Now you can do that in either orientation, the light will still switch the same. Basically you can go to either one of those light switches then, and in the same way as the method above, the first one we spoke about, switch it at either position in any order you like, and it will turn the light to the opposite state it's currently in. So to repeat that, you join in your commons, your L1 and L2 with your 3-core cable between the two light switches, and then with another twin and earth cable, you drop off your L1 and L2 with your brown into, in my example, L2, and blue into L1, obviously oversleeved as brown, which is your switch line. And then that then goes up to your pendant ceiling rows, and the brown is into the loop in, loop out common bar, and then your blue oversleeved of brown would go into the switch line of the ceiling rows pendant. And that's essentially it. And you can drop your intermediate light switches in the middle of that, so if you need a third light switch somewhere, you can have an intermediate, and you basically break that link wire between the two light switches. So you've got your commons and your L1s and L2s joined together at both those light switches. If you imagine a break in the middle, the common is uninterrupted, so it passes straight through. You just join that in a Wago, or some of these more modern intermediate switches have a common wiring point actually as well. And then you would, in essence, have L1 and L2 from one of the light switches wired into one side of the intermediate switch, L1 and L2 exactly as they were identified, and then on the other side of the intermediate light switch going out to the what was the second light switch, you would have L1 and L2 wired in with the same colour. So it essentially just passes through, it sits in the middle of those two light switches, with L1 going into L1 on the intermediate switch, L2 going into L2 on the intermediate switch, and then at the other side of that intermediate switch you have a second set of terminations marked L1 and L2 as well, which would have the corresponding L1 and L2 from the other light switch wired in. So I'll try and get a diagram and pop it up into this video if I can, so that makes a little bit more sense. But there are loads of other diagrams across the internet, and we can speak a little bit about them on this video actually. They might just crop up while we're running through, because I wanted, if I can make this work, see if I can zoom me down. I'll put me right up there in the top corner, the smaller the better, eh? On the Efixx website, there is absolutely loads of content that is going to help you as apprentices. You'll see Gary here on these two videos, and one is how to connect a light switch in a ceiling rows, and that basically runs through in far greater detail and with better explanation than I could ever attempt just what I've been speaking about. So go and check that one out. It talks about using your twin and CPC cables and your 3-core and CPC cable, and then the second video actually goes on to talk about intermediate switching as well. So there's those, and that's in the PVC twin and CPC wiring help section in the Apprentice Hub on the Efixx website. But if we go and look in the Apprentice Hub and just look at all the content in here, I send apprentices over to this every single day, and if you've not already checked it out, you really should go and have a look, because it is just littered with high quality content that's really going to help you. There's practice exam questions, you've got installation theory, you've got your science and principles, health and safety, jargon buster, the EV charging, wiring regs. It is literally all in there. PVC twin and earth, industrial wiring systems. It is an absolutely vast resource of free information that is going to do nothing but help. Let's go and have a look at the science and principles as an example just while we're on here. You'll see here there's one about magnetism, mechanical science, so I'm just clicking that while we're here, see what pops up. You've got some questions here to do with most basic circuits contain a source, a load, conductors and control. In a simple lighting circuit, which item provides control? So you've got some set questions there that you can run through and answer. If we have a look at, let's have a look at this one. So electron theory, you've got a nice video from Joe where he's going to talk through that for you, and then some questions to answer as well. If we zoom on back, let's have a look at some of the practice exam questions. So you've got your electrical installation practice questions, science and principles exam questions, and health and safety. So we could go and look at the electrical installation ones, and yeah, it's just look at all this. You've got questions on PVC cables, conduit, containment. There's just too much for me to sit and talk about right now. as I'm scrolling through the screen, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you haven't, go and look at Efixx's website. And obviously you've got Joe's YouTube channel as well, so Joe Robinson Training, and also Gary's channel with GSH. Equally with some amazing stuff on there to help you as apprentices. If you're struggling with understanding some of the stuff you've been taught at college or demonstrated at work, or you've not had an opportunity to do certain aspects of these things in the day role that you've got, go and have a look. If we was to have a look at electrical installation, ADS, so automatic disconnection of supply, it runs through some questions there of which of the following is not a form of basic protection. So you've got a question on there about that. You can sit and go through this over and over and over, and probably never get through all the stuff on there. Now, one of the other aspects of the Efixx stuff, they've got their know-how section. So you can have some training on RCDs, for example, surge protection, MCB circuit protection, 18th edition and consumer units. It's CPD accredited, so that's one of the things that Efixx have done with their content. They've managed to get it CPD certified, and it will count towards your CPD learning hours. So if you're a practicing electrician or an apprentice, this all counts. You can record it and show that you've done it. The stuff on Part L lighting, you've got ventilation and an extraction system from Envirovent. Ansel lighting, they've got Part L non-domestic, connections and connectors, wiring accessories, explosion rating, that sounds fun, so you can go and have a look at that one, get a bit of CPD. You've got industrial sockets, caravans, sites, what isn't to like about that? So there's all of that content there, and as I said, Gary's gone to town with the lighting as well, so what I'm talking about here, go and check out his content on it. His videos are brilliant. But I hope that me sitting and chatting about it, if you managed to pop your headphones in for 10 minutes, has helped a little bit. Just a little short and sweet one to do with two-way light switching, intermediate light switching, with some very badly drawn diagrams that I've popped up on the board. I don't have any different coloured pens. I'm going to have to get some, I guess. It might make these a bit clearer, but hopefully that has made some sense of how to do your two-way light switching, and if you want to drop an intermediate light switching as well, how you can do that, and why these two different methods are perhaps used in different environments with different wiring systems. That's basically it. I hope you found that of some use, and it has not been a waste of your time tuning in. If you want to go off and check Efixx's stuff for their know-how section and the apprentice hub, I'll drop links in the description of the video and the podcast. Go ahead over there, go hit up Gary and Joe on YouTube, and they'll be far more insightful than I could ever dream to be. But if I've helped at all, that's what it's all about, and I'll keep these podcasts coming when I get a little chance on my dinner break or whatever. I'm actually sat this evening waiting to do a podcast with Neil on his show, so I'm going to edit this together while I'm waiting for that to start, and I'll maybe drop it out later in the week. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening, and I will catch you on the next episode of the Apprentice 1-to-1 podcast.